I thought this was a very interesting question. Now that we are allowed to request absentee ballots for no reason, right? You can have any reason out there. Do we need to submit that request every single election? So for senior citizens who have already indicated, for instance, that they need an absentee ballot, do they need to do that for every election, or now with automatic registration, will that carry over from election to election?
So you do not need to give a reason. Currently, under the form we have, you have to apply for an absentee voter ballot every election. It's making a lot of changes to the vote-by-mail system, so one of the things that this advisory commission is hopefully going to help us figure out is what's the best way to put all those new no-reason absentee voting rules in effect. But right now, you still have to apply for that absent voter ballot, but you do not have to give a reason for getting it.
Okay, but will you have to, each time, restate that you want an absentee ballot?
So currently, the way the form is designed, you put the election you want it for. On the current form, there's not an option on the box to say, give me one for every election.
Gotcha, okay. This is a good one. What is the status of H.R. 1 in the Senate, right? So we passed H.R. 1, good question. We passed the H.R. 1 through the House. But the House is right now controlled by the Democrats, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, and we know that Senator McConnell has already said he's not looking to take up H.R. 1, that he has concerns about pieces of H.R. 1. Tiffany, why don't you give us your best shot of how we're gonna get at least pieces of this passed?
Well, I think let me tell you where it's at right now, and then let me tell you where I think we have some hope and some optimism. So the Senate is actually introducing a companion package to H.R. 1 next week or the week after. It currently already has 40 co-sponsors on it, and we are looking to add more every single day. Senator McConnell has been really clear that he gets to decide what's brought up for a vote in the Senate and what isn't, and that he doesn't want this brought up for a vote because he thinks that allowing everyone to vote is a partisan power grab. So there are two strategies that we need to do at the same time. These are not an either or, this is an and. Okay, so number one, Congresswoman Slotkin already talked about it, which is that your voice matters, and public pressure on senators matters. So you need to call Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters. They're both supportive, but still call them. Let them know that you want them to do everything they can to try to get this brought up for a vote. Basically, the entire Senate needs to hear that across the country, and we're trying to help with that, but we need everyone to help us help with that. If you remember, in 2017, Senator McConnell said very clearly that they were going to get health care repealed, right? And instead, there was public protest across the country, and what everyone thought was a done deal didn't happen. So, again, public voices, your voices, they matter. Number two, this bill, thankfully, the package breaks up into lots of different components, many of which are bipartisan, many of which I believe have a really good shot at passing the House again, including Congresswoman Slotkin's amendment and making sure that we are actually closing loopholes that let foreign money into our system. And in the Senate, those are going to have a really good opportunity to get amended onto appropriations bills that have to pass. And we've actually already seen transparency measures get passed and signed into law. So I actually think we have a really good shot with some of the smaller pieces, like some of the disclosure pieces, some of the stopping coordination between candidates and super PACs, the closing foreign loopholes, some of the election security and modernization pieces. So we'll take it in chunks, and we'll keep working on the big package at the same time.
I told Tiffany before she came, I said, you know, you're going to be in front of a Michigan crowd. They're going to be happy about H.R. 1, but they're going to want to know how it actually becomes law, right? We are pragmatic, practical people here. Okay, two questions I think that are more on the technical side. Can someone in Michigan be automatically registered by getting their driver's license, but also have another active voter registration in another state?
Well, when you register, we ask you to provide your previous address. And then we tell you that by registering here, you're authorizing cancellation of your previous registration. Basically what happens is we take your registration, we inform the other state, and then they cancel your registration in the other state. Obviously, with any sort of huge interstate program, there is some lag time. So sometimes people will still be registered in one state and have, then registered in another state without the one getting canceled. So one of the things we're looking at doing is improving our data quality and our communication so that we can make that process faster. We joined a program called ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center, and that's going to give us better data on people who might be registered here and elsewhere. So we are going to keep our voter rolls as clean as possible. We also need to be careful and make sure that we're not canceling anyone by mistake. So that's the balance there, but when you move from one state to another, register in the second state, your first registration is supposed to be canceled.
And one other technical question, this is from Fred, who is the VP of the National Federation of the Blind. 2 of the 3 new voting machines that are coming out are not accessible for the blind and tend to suppress voter turnout. It was more of a statement, but do you want to address that, the new voting machines?
Sure, I'd be happy to address it. I have to admit that I do not have the technical expertise or really the legal expertise under the ADA to evaluate that question. I do know that we are looking actively at ways to improve the accessibility of our machines, both allowing people better access to vote in person on the voter assist terminals, which are for people with disabilities, and also trying to make it easier to vote absentee without assistance for people with disabilities. So that's certainly a challenge. I do know that our system is not as accessible as it could be, so we're working on ways to improve that.
Okay, I think this is for Tiffany. It's from Alan. Why do you think super PACs don't have to report from whom they receive contributions when the FEC requires names and information to be reported?
That's a great question. Hi, Alan. Hi.
There he is, and back.
Fantastic question. So you're right, actually. Super PACs are supposed to force you to disclose. Okay, let's take a step back. There are lots of technicalities here. So political action committees can only take up to $5,000 from any individual, but super PACs, which came about after Citizens United and a couple of subsequent Supreme Court decisions, actually allow individuals to give unlimited money, right? So the thing is they're not supposed to coordinate with any candidate, though. That is how they are, that is what is supposed to be set up. We know that doesn't always happen, and one part of HR 1 is actually stopping that coordination, but I digress. So they can take unlimited money, but they're supposed to have to report it. However, what we know is happening is that organizations are giving to super PACs that they don't have to disclose their money, where their money's coming from. So I'll give one example. I could do this on either side of the aisle, so I promise I'm not just picking on anyone. But the Congressional Leadership Fund, for instance, in last cycle, took a lot of money from the American Action Network. The American Action Network is set up as a 501c4. That organization does not have to disclose their donors, so we actually have no way to trace back where that donation is really originating from. So when we talk about super PACs and some of the money going into them being dark, it's because there's lots of ways right now that there are these shell games being played that allow for those donations to really be hidden from their true source. One of the things that HR 1 actually seeks to address. We've also seen some really creative things happen recently. For example, in this last election, some super PACs went into debt to vendors for services, but then didn't actually disclose who the donors were until after the election. It was very tricky. It was not something we had foreseen. So we also put in a provision into HR 1 to be able to stop that from happening.
Okay. Someone gives us a list of topics and says, please discuss. Should there be mandatory time periods between the end of someone's term and their work as a lobbyist? Want to address that?
Yes, absolutely.
Says yes.
And there's currently supposed to be these cooling off periods. I believe it's 2 years currently. One of the problems is that, all right, I'm going to go back to 1974 again, because apparently I like to go back to that time frame. 1974, about 3% of members of Congress left Congress and went and became lobbyists. Anyone want to take a guess at what that percentage is today? 60%. Good guess. You get the gold star. 60% of members of Congress go on to become lobbyists. However, some of them don't initially even register, but they go to these public affair firms and say that they're senior advisors, but that they're not actual lobbyists, even though they're meeting with members of Congress and talking about pieces of legislation. So again, one of the things that we tried to tighten up in HR 1 was actually closing that loophole and making sure that people couldn't just get around this cooling off period and that you actually had to take a break. And so again, right now, it's 2 years is what the law is. I don't think that's nearly long enough. There are proposals to create a lifetime ban so members cannot become lobbyists at all. Other proposals that have that stretching out to 5 years or 10 years. I would love to see that increase, and I'd love to see those loopholes closed.
If I could just add, in Michigan, we also, Secretary of State Benson has recently advocated for some reforms to our state rules for state legislators, which would expand the cooling off period that we have and also get rid of this loophole that former legislators use by calling themselves legislative consultants. So we are also looking at that at the state level.
All right, we'll just take a couple more because I know we're coming up on the end of our time here. This is another person who has just said election topic questions and lists a bunch of them. One is, I'll turn it into the form of a question. How do we prevent a person from voting in more than once in an election given same-day voting?
So we can tell if you voted, is the answer. So if you have voted in one place and then you try to go vote in another place, register and vote in another place, that basically the clerk has a notification they can see that you've already cast a vote. So you're not able to do that from a technical standpoint.
And then one other technical question. Shouldn't we require picture ID to verify citizenship and residency to vote in order to prevent non-citizens from voting?
We already have an identification law in Michigan. It's not a requirement because if you don't have an ID, you can sign an affidavit and be allowed to vote. That has been sufficient to prevent voter impersonation. There's very little evidence that there's any significant level of voter impersonation in Michigan. And in terms of the citizenship issue, it really wouldn't address that because lots of identifications that you might have, you could have whether you